What is crack-a-lackin', fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you with a very special podcast, a crossover podcast with none other than my very good friend and colleague, Andrew Claudio of Knicks Film School. Follow him on Twitter at Andrew Claudio _, spelled exactly as it sounds. Follow Knicks Film School on Twitter at Nick Film School. That's at Nick Film SKOOL on Twitter. And you can subscribe to all their stuff. You can find their podcast, their YouTube. Those links are in the podcast and YouTube descriptions. We recorded basically a home and home, split it into two. And so the first part is up on Knicks Film School. Go check that out. The link to this specific episode will be in the podcast and YouTube descriptions. In both episodes, the first part, we really talked about the Knicks to date, whether they exceeded expectations, the importance of Julius Randle, Jalen Brunson's MVP case. In this part, we get into more of the rise of Jalen Brunson right off the bat. And then we talk about the biggest potential threats to the Boston Celtics in the Eastern Conference looking ahead to the NBA playoffs. Is it the Knicks if they're fully healthy? Is it the Cavs? Could it be the Sixers at this point with Embiid healthy and DeAnthony Melton looking like he's going to be healthier as well? Is it someone else? How do we feel about the Magic, the Heat, the Pacers heading into the playoffs? So we get into all that fun stuff. So again, go check out part one, but also make sure you're checking out part two. And if you're from Knicks Film School and that's why you follow them, you sub to them, and that's why you're here, hit the sub button for us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Lots of fun around these parts. Talk about the league at large, including your New York Knicks. And finally, one of my favorite things I love to hear about our podcast is when I have guests on. And Claudio hosted this, by the way. So he's going to close out Hardwood Knocks at the end. You're going to want to stay to the end because Claudio closes us out for Hardwood Knocks. No shout out to Frank Ntilikina, though. We might need to fire him. But anyway, one of my favorite things that I love to hear is whenever we have creators or guests on and they will DM me, not all the time, but it just happens, and talk about the influx of subscribers or followers they've gotten to their content, whether it's on YouTube or Substack or Patreon because of appearing on this show. That means the world in terms of community. Now, I want you to subscribe and follow Knicks Film School, but I saw that Claudio was dealing with some fuck shit YouTube commenters. And so I would ask, I want to see everyone just in the comment section of this YouTube video, or you can get at him on Twitter if you're listening to this audio. Just say nice things about Andrew in the comments. Talk about how charismatic and knowledgeable and gorgeous he just is. I want to see the comments flooded with nothing but positivity for Claudio, who is among the best in the business at what he does, in the 100th percentile, wears so many different hats when you look at what he does for Knicks Film School, having the knowledge of not just the Knicks, but the entire league. He hosts, he produces, he edits. He does a lot of business stuff for them on the side. He has helped grow them along with Jonathan Macri and their entire squad over there into this behemoth and a bastion of not just Knicks content, but basketball content and the stuff that they do. I can't imagine saying anything negative about an independent podcast that is committed to putting out so much thorough, nuanced, comprehensive coverage of their team, even if you ultimately disagree with their takes. And so I'm asking, pleading, begging even, you don't have to say nice things about me this time. We all know that I love to have my ego stroked. I want you in the comments, on Twitter, on social media, just shouting out Andrew Claudio for the great work he does. And you can also, again, just comment on his winning smile and just overall appearance, because he is fantastic. And I really, in all seriousness, had a lot of fun with this conversation. And part of it, in part one, another reason to go check it out, we talked about a statistic with Jalen Brunson that apparently, Claudio sent it to me and he texted it to me, and then I saw it in my mentions. It made it onto the Knicks broadcast. So what other endorsement do you need to listen to this entire show than that, and the fact that Claudio is amazing? But enough is enough. This is almost 5 minutes of me rambling as per usual. Let's go talk to Andrew Claudio of Knicks Film School.
That's the craft that he's mastered this year, is he's becoming more and more unstoppable, which is why I think he's elevated to this level. We're having the conversation about, is this one of the 5 greatest individual seasons a Nick has ever had, is justified, at least like post ABA merger. I think it is, it's like, it's the Melo season I referenced. It's honestly the next season too, where he played 10 more games. It's a couple of Ewing years, like Randall's MIP season and a couple of Bernard King seasons. And that's it. And I think Brunson's is up there.
Yeah, I mean, he would have to be. My God, it feels like a million years ago Julius Randle had the MIP season.
Yeah. And I can hear people yelling now, open gyms. Yes, I know. No one was in attendance. Okay. He was still out. He shot 41% from three that season. Like he did something only Larry Bird and Jokic have ever done, averaging like 25, 10, and 6 on like a certain percentage from three.
This entire discussion makes me fear, and I actually normally enjoy player rankings. I enjoy doing them. I enjoy reading or listening or watching them because I'm not someone who takes it personally, but it makes me fear the reactions to where Jalen Brunson winds up whenever the ESPN rank or the Ringer rank or the Hardwood Knocks rank comes out. But it's going to be so malicious on both ends of the spectrum because no one's going to be there. He's going to be one of those stars where there's just never a consensus on because there was this abrupt, I don't want to say meteoric rise because everyone knew he was good before he left Dallas, but people not that they don't want to believe, but the idea of him even just to say he's forget about value, even all NBA teams, or just to say that Jalen Brunson is a top 15 player. Do you know how wild that is in theory just because of the other names that should still be involved in that discussion? We could probably rattle off 25 guys who are in contention without even thinking about top 15 right now. So I'm officially terrified to see where he ends up in player rankings, but also just the reactions to you Jalen Brunson 14? Like how and people that's too low, that's too high. I don't know.
Can I give you and other people dreading that some advice? Because last year I actually missed out on I know FIBA happened, but I missed out on the Brunson, Halliburton, Maxey discourse because I got married and then went on a honeymoon. I just tapped out of all of that. So obviously we can't do that.
Some nerve you have.
Well, just like we can't do that. I can't do that again. I'm actually going to have to find other ways. Watch baseball.
Baseball used to be my favorite sport.
Really?
I can't do it anymore. I was a Yankee fan.
You're a Yankee fan? Okay.
And I was a very big Andy Pettitte, Tino Martinez guys. I won't Google their political affiliations because I don't want to know what happened with those dudes. But that was the era.
My life growing up idolizing Mike Piazza. Yeah.
Oh, rough stuff. That's why I refuse to. I won't Google anything about Allen Houston personal life or something. I don't want to know.
We have officially got off the rails here, sir. The funny, to your point, that stuff's off season conversations. It's the fun stuff we do in this NBA bubble that we have to potentially keep ourselves entertained over the summers. We argue about it's the barbershop conversation. Who's better, this person or that person? And the Knicks have a guy that has a really strong case to be better than anybody you name.
It's almost great to appreciate that we can have the MVP discussion about Jalen Brunson, not necessarily about him winning it, but where he lands on there. While there's also, it feels like that's the more compelling discussion to have rather than, well, where do the Knicks end up in the playoff bracket? Because not that you don't care, but it almost doesn't matter. But first of all, East is East, but the margins are so thin. But you almost just, the way this team has played, it's this is the more debatable thing is where does Jalen Brunson belong in the MVP debate rather than where does this Knicks team belong in the hierarchy of the Eastern Conference? And so it's you have to appreciate whether you're a fan of the Knicks, someone who covers the Knicks, or just you're a fan of another team, just this team, given all that's happened this year and Jalen Brunson turning into the tenor of the discussion that we're having now.
Yeah. So let's wrap there. Rank the 5 teams that are the biggest threat to the Celtics. In the East. In the East, yeah, just in the East. Though I think we both have the Nuggets coming out of the West. Ironically, the team I would say is the biggest threat to the Nuggets is the Dallas Mavericks. But
that's interesting.
We'll see how that may be a second round matchup. So it's tough for me to say the conference finalist won't be the biggest threat to them.
I could see I get the Mavs. I could see the Timberwolves being a big threat to.
They have to get healthy. I know what all the Nuggets
people say. Is the GOAT.
Yes, he's right there with Jalen Brunson for MVP. I like Naz Reid. I should clarify. I like Naz Reid. I've had a skeptical eye at the Timberwolves all season. I think crunch time offense matters.
The West is weird because it's such higher end or at least there are so many good teams, but I feel like the Nuggets are just head and shoulders above everyone to where I understand people that are worried about Phoenix, but there's also and we do this with the MVP debate or maybe even the playoff bracket. We have now 75 plus games of information. This team is telling us this. Mm-hmm. It's time to accept that, okay, it's cool that Phoenix is seems like they're figuring stuff out now. This huge sample size from the entire year is going to tell us that they are going to Jekyll and Hyde it at minimum. And so I feel like there's a tendency to get caught up in recency bias to where it's if you wanted to give, let's use me as an example, kind of be like, man, should I take Giannis out of my top 5 of the MVP voting because the Bucks have had like this 4-game stretch, which didn't he miss 1 or 2 of those games too? So it's like the recency bias will kick in there, but I think you could probably name the Nuggets will own any team but the Lakers. You could just tell me is the biggest threat to the Nuggets. You could probably make a case there and I would listen to you. But the East, so I do think it's Milwaukee is still the biggest threat. Their sample size, especially under Doc, with their best players on the court, their 4 best players, they're still trucking opponents. It's just so small. And so if this team actually puts together a stretch where they're all those 4 guys, Dame, Brook Lopez, Chris Middleton, and Giannis are all available, that's a team that can really do, like, are the stuff they're dealing with, has it been more preventative and cautious? Or is this like something that's actually ingrained and there's something wrong here and we can't count on these guys to play as well or to be as available? There's even been some weird stuff with Brook Lopez at the end of games recently in favor of Bobby Portis. I still default to the Bucks because of the top end talent there. After that, I think you have to have the Knicks. Like if you told me OG Anunoby before he had returned that OG Anunoby wasn't going to play, I feel like it's a different discussion. I think it's the Knicks after that, especially by virtue of whatever the heck is going on in Cleveland. And they've dealt with a ton of injuries, but something just seems off there. And then when you like after those 2 teams, like where it's the Bucks and the Knicks, I'm not sure I didn't think we were going to wind up here necessarily at the start of the season where it's like, I kind of know the Bucks and the Knicks are threatening and I don't know who else is threatening after that. Philly with Embiid is very interesting. But I keep coming back to the fact that they still have to find out so much about their team to where it's, as an example, Buddy Hield, as we're recording this, Buddy Hield, Tyrese Maxey, and Joel Embiid have played 4 possessions together.
Yeah. And
so it's like, they need to still, and like DeAnthony Melton, is he just done for the year with his back stuff? He's a very important part to how they're going to want to defend. I'm going to throw the Sixers in 4 though, just because Embiid I thought he was going to have to work himself into game shape. And that I also questioned, like, should he even come back? I was just like, is this the season? So I'll throw the Sixers in 4 there.
Who's 3?
The Knicks.
So who's 2?
Oh, I'm sorry. So
I see what you did there. So not ranking, but the teams that are
the biggest threat. The Knicks are the second biggest threat. I'd have the Sixers as the third biggest threat. Maybe Miami will make me just come to not even considering them, like regret not considering them here like they do every year, but I can't put them there. There's just Indiana is still no. Orlando is so ugly. Like they can win their defense is hellacious is basically what I'm getting at. Is there even a 4th biggest threat to the Celtics in the East? Like what is
well, so real quick, I agree with the first 4 you just mentioned. I think there's 2 teams that are really 3 teams. Actually, the 4 other teams I put with the Knicks are all, if you get your shit together teams.
Cleveland I'll just throw Cleveland as the 4th biggest threat because they have the top end talent too. And they just they've been better for the most part when they're shorthanded versus when they're not,
but it's what I'm saying. It's if you get your shit together, I think you're a threat to the Celtics, or just one of the threats to the Celtics. The team that seems to have their shit most together is the Knicks because of the structure that's been put in place and how they have signature wins against all of these teams, so that's why it's you can expect their base level of competence being their defense and their identity to this point in the season.
And they've also answered almost, I would say, nearly every doubt in kind of the affirmative. And it's just the one they can't answer is, well, do they have enough secondary shot creation? And you know what? We're not going to know until we get to the postseason. But even they're everyone was okay. They're a good 3-point shooting team at one point, and now they've kind of I think they're 17 since the All-Star break. But guess what? They're 3rd in 3-point frequency. That was something we used to harp on with them. So. Yeah, I think the order could flip up. I don't know. I would throw it to you because my 4, I forgot Cleveland, but before I mapped this out, it was very clearly there's Milwaukee, New York, and there's Cleveland, and those are the teams that are the threat, and Philly with Embiid are the real threats to Boston. I've kind of been is Orlando a bigger threat than Miami right now? It's kind of where I'm at. Do you just go with Miami because Bam is maybe the best postseason defender in the NBA? I don't really know how to tackle that final spot.
I think Miami, if they get the shit together, is a threat. I think Philly I mean, they seem to be getting their shit. I think they're going to win out. So that's a 47-win team. I think they're a threat, especially if Embiid is healthy. I think if Cleveland gets their shit together, and I think if Milwaukee gets their shit together, like that's literally the.
It's just a weird thing to say
level
if
of-
they get their shit together, and we're recording this on April 8th.
But like we've seen teams turn it on before. That Cavs team that made the finals was 24-24 over the. I know they have LeBron, right?
But that's like the Nuggets when they're going to coast. Which of these teams has earned the right or the benefit of the doubt? I would say, and the answer is none of them. I know Milwaukee's tried and true because of Giannis, but this is a different version of Milwaukee. The Knicks feel like the most trustworthy of the options there. And so
you're hitting at it. I think because the Knicks are the one team that's answered, like you said, in the affirmative to every doubt, they might be the biggest threat, to be honest. Top end talent, I'm with you. Like, got to go Milwaukee 1 probably.
If they could, I want to make the case. I want to pick the Knicks right now, but I just feel like it's almost like I've seen even the peak of what Giannis and Dame could be. It feels like they haven't gelled and that they can still operate a little independently. But like seeing the best version of the Bucks, just like the Knicks don't have another star on their roster right now, and the Bucks have at least one. I mean, like Brook has kind of fallen off a little bit. Feels like defensively this year, and Chris Middleton's still good offensively, but they have their own defensive questions. Just like the Knicks have their shot creation questions. They're right there. And to say that when, regardless of what you think with Julius, which might be the most complicated, this player's really good, 2-time All-NBA guy, but has the most complicated relationship with his own fan base, it feels like. Maybe I'm too far removed from that, but that's what it feels like.
No, complicated is the correct answer. Correct way to phrase it, Dan.
Like, name another situation where it's like even close. Is it the Pelicans with Zion and Brandon Ingram, maybe? Like that might be the best, closest comp?
The funny thing is the DeRozan comps, the DeRozan Toronto comps have been what I've used for a lot this year. The problem is DeMar DeRozan is beloved unanimously in Toronto. And like the day they made the Kawhi trade, it was heartbreaking, but understood they had to get better.
Yeah.
When Julius gets traded, it's probably 70-30, and the 30 will be, I actually don't know what the direction the 70 or the 30 will be. That it's like, great, we finally got rid of him. / man, that guy did a lot of winning, but I understand the team needed to make a move to get better. You know, this isn't a good stats, bad team guy. He's been a part of a lot of winning in New York. It's just worst high volume postseason player in NBA history. Bad.
Fair. What is his postseason sample? 50, and that does speak to some of his own flaws. But it's what is it? What does he have? 15 games right now?
Yeah,
or is
it's 3 rounds. Yeah, it's 3 rounds.
It's just like. But my actual point was whatever you feel about him, he is no worse than their third most important player because of what they need him to do. And to be without him, and for us to be sitting here going, like, are they the second biggest threat to come out of the East? In theory, it's just like I'm talking in circles because I've said some version of this 90 times. I'm still trying to wrap my brain around who is that fifth threat, because you asked me for 5, and I think I'm going to go with Indiana. I know that they're
over Miami.
Yeah, it's
okay.
I guess I'm tempting fate here for them to flip the switch, but like Jimmy Butler's been weirder this season than in seasons past. And they've got some weird stuff going on with the starting 5 where it's like, can we just agree that it probably needs to be Tyler Hero, not Duncan Robinson in there? And is Duncan Robinson hurt? What's going on? But I look at Indy, they've lost a lot of games that they should win, but kind of like the different stuff they could get to, and even some of the different defensive things they could try. And shout out to Caitlin Cooper of Basketball She Wrote, who's been like breaking down those like an exceptional maniac. Having Siakam and Halliburton, like those two guys, and then the spacing they can generate on offense, the different cadences at which they can now play at offense where it's supercharged, or they can slow things down a little bit. They can get to some really hyper-aggressive defensive lineups as well. They feel more well-balanced because we know Orlando, their offense is going to be bad. I think their spacing is actually good. It's just they don't have threats to maximize it, and so that's why defenses guard them the way they do. And then Miami, their offense is just, I know you have the Terry Rozier factor there, and he could swing it with his own kind of, we saw it against the Knicks like a week or so ago where he goes off, but they're an imbalanced team when you look at how they play on offense versus what they could do on defense. And I mean, like, we're not really like talking about Chicago or Atlanta in this discussion anyway. So I think I'm just going to go with Indy. Feels like they can get to maybe they don't have the highest peak of the remaining teams, but they might have the highest balance, like potential on both sides of the ball to me. Perhaps that's still the Heat, and I'm tempting fate for them to go full how are they in the Eastern Conference Finals again, but they don't feel like that team.
Yeah, I think I've just been a doubter of Indiana and Orlando for the same reasons. One, I don't think has the defense to win in the playoffs, and one doesn't have the offense to win in the playoffs. And look, famous last words, like one of them might eliminate the Knicks in a couple weeks, but
that would be, I don't know. I'm kind of at the point where if the Knicks lost to one of those two teams, I would actually be surprised.
I'd be shocked. I'd be surprised. But that, I think, is why I think we're the circles that we're running here is that it feels wrong to say this Knicks team is probably going to go to the conference finals or is like a good pick to go to the conference finals. And you look at the East and it's like these two teams that seem to have their stuff together and have overachieved to an extent in Indiana and Orlando, but we think the Knicks are better. And then these other teams that there's a world where they're better than the Knicks, but like, are we really going to pick Miami again from an 8 seed? Or are we really going to pick Philly, like with throwing their core together with 10 games left? And the stench that's coming out of Milwaukee and Cleveland at the moment, that those teams look prime for first round exits. So this Knicks team that continues to just overachieve, and every time you're like, oh, this is when the losing streak starts, this is when they go away, they don't go away,
everything that feels like they won't do or the reasons they would lose is conceptual for the most part. I know the bench has been bad, but now it seems like maybe they've unlocked a little bit of that. Whereas with these other teams, we know what's actually going to go wrong. Like with the Knicks, it's saying, well, they're not just going to, even if they play Bojan more, are they going to have the level, like is the shot creation going to be enough for their offense to get by? They've told us again and again and again during the regular season, the answer is yes. And so we're just waiting for something to go wrong there. Whereas with these other teams, they kind of need to improve or answer these like questions that already exist. And so I know the postseason is different, but that's what makes it fascinating. And just very quickly, because you did ask me for like matchups, you mentioned Orlando and Indiana, just the contrast in styles from those two teams. I want to see that playoff series. And then I also want to see Philly versus Milwaukee, because they're both trying to figure some things out when you look at how little what should be their best lineups have played together, or their most important units have played together recently. And so like if the bracket shakes out, and anything could basically happen in the East at this point. So give me those two matchups and give me Cavs versus Knicks part 2. So we could just establish once and for all that wasn't even close to a fluke for New York last year. But Orlando and Indy, you laid it out. There's just such that contrast in styles. I'd be fascinated to see those two teams play each other.
You literally picked the 1 through 8 that I want to see is that like give me Boston, Miami round 2 in your first round, or Boston, Chicago. Just Boston, Miami is more fun. And then something's got to give in the superstar rankings with Giannis against Embiid. Like we're going to lose one of them in the first round, which is just enticing. Give me Knicks, Cleveland part 2. And then the conflicting styles of Indiana, because it means either Indiana or Orlando are going to make the second round, and that's hilarious. So,
that's a great point.
Yeah, because we're looking up and one of them made the second round. It's like, oh,
and then who knows?
Orlando, look at you.
And it's like one of them could then theoretically, because it only takes 4 wins from there. Are they just is Indy or Orlando in the conference finals?
The conference finals. Yeah. So, that would be my dream scenario. I will say there's a world where.
I'm sorry to interrupt you there. Are you? And I guess it's a stupid question but throwing out getting to say we reached the conference finals, would you be team let's delay Boston as long as possible, or if it was we could just get them in the second round, like
I was for a while. I don't want to say the season has house money. That's disrespectful to what the way the Knicks have played. They operate like a team that expects to be competitive in any series. There's just expectations that come the following season if you made it to the conference finals the year before. You could lose in the second round next year, and technically you could lose to a better team than you can lose to like in 7 games, and it's a heartbreaker. But because you made the conference finals the year before, in a year that the East couldn't get their shit together, it's looked at as a step back. What's up?
Hashtag Atlanta Hawks 2021.
Quite literally. Well, like the Hawks, that's quite literally a fluke. But like you don't want to welcome podcasters saying like, oh, that was a fluke. So, I do think the progression of things being like, getting to a conference finals would be great eventually. Now, look, the thing I think I don't know if I've danced around it or if I've actually said it. I think the Knicks may end. I literally just said May. I think the Knicks are going to end up in the conference finals. Like I think they're the team playing it the best right now outside of Boston. And then I think that's when you'll see, they kind of could have used another secondary creator against this 61 win team with a near 12 point differential, you know?
Yeah. But it's just progress isn't, and this isn't saying you would view it this way, progress isn't linear. And so people can't separate, if they get bounced, even they have excuses built in where even if they got bounced in the first round by, let's say, Cleveland, it's, well, we were missing our second best shot creator, our second most important offensive player. That should be OG Anunoby's elbow probably wasn't right. Progress isn't. Yeah.
Anunoby going out changes everything. Then it's house money. Like, give me Boston first round for that matter, you know?
Oh, that would have been so chaotic had that been in the cards. But yeah, so at least we're aligned on the bracket. Look, you said you think they're going to make the conference finals. I don't have an argument against you to say that they won't. Like, I wouldn't, as someone who's, let's take away like any attachment I have to the Knicks, I don't have an answer if I was trying to be a devil's advocate as to why it should be definitively Milwaukee or Cleveland, or even you start going through the options. It's just like, after you get to the Embiid variable in Philly feels like, okay, maybe we need to respect them a little bit more. But then I'm also just kind of like, look at what Embiid has done in the playoffs over the course of his career.
So you realize the Embiid factor is like, so the guy that's never been to the conference finals is the thing standing in the way of the Knicks getting to the conference finals. So
yeah, and it's just, I mean, like, yeah, well, I'm not trying to argue against you, but even if I was, I don't think I could.
Yeah. Well, should be a fun playoffs, and it's absolutely been a roller coaster, but eventually fun Knicks season. And I hope you've gotten to enjoy it, because I know deep down in that cold heart of yours that the media life has completely destroyed, you still have an affection for when the Knicks get a W, Dan Favale.
There's affection. There's also, I just love kind of out of left field stuff. It's like Dante DiVincenzo shooting this year, Deuce McBride, like they signed the extension and what he's been able to do. Isaiah Hartenstein, he made me look so bad at the beginning of last year when I called him the best signing in free agency. And now it's like, all right, that take aged.
Now it looks great. That take, you were talking about takes that aged well. And the Knicks like have a lot of things that came out of left field this year, to your point.
Yeah. And so I won't say it's completely out of left field, but I'm sure in our November podcast that we did, we weren't asking where Jalen Brunson was going to finish in the MVP ladder. And now it's not even just asking where he'll finish in terms of the total votes. It's, well, will he be top 5? And like, can he beat out Jason Tatum and Giannis or whatever that? I love that element to start, like the Oklahoma City Thunder being ahead of schedule. Like, those are the types of things that are just, this is why we like the game of basketball, is for the fun and the good-hearted stuff. The Knicks have been, with the exception of very few moments this year, just a really feel good story.
Yeah.
Tom Thibodeau being like versatile. Like,
bro, when he went to the 3-guard lineup that we were begging him to do with quickly, and it's like, oh, you'll do it with Deuce because he's Klay Thompson, apparently. But
we still get people in our YouTube comments who will bring back, I had written a piece about why I thought Tom Thibodeau should have been fired. I think it was, was it 7 games into last season?
7 games into last season. I remember. It was after the Hawks game. We were all thinking it too.
Right. And to where I am now with him, where it was, we actually had this debate on Hardwood Knocks with our award show, was how high up the coach of the year rankings does he need to go right now? So that's cool to have gone for. I could admit that I was wrong in the moment. I do think this wasn't circa. I know a lot of Knicks fans supported Jalen Brunson. I think a lot of Knicks fans wanted Tibbs gone at that moment as well too. But it's like, I kind of, not that I like being wrong, but when your opinions or perspective just evolves because something you really firmly believed wasn't going to happen, like Tom Thibodeau becoming like a semblance of versatile, like it's just like, it's really fun to watch and follow.
Yeah. I'd argue it's his best season as a head coach. Like the season with the Bulls that they were a 4 seed, I think it was actually a 5 seed, the year after Derrick Rose tore his ACL in the playoffs. And then like they made the second round and beat that Nets team after like Nate Robinson was like the engine on that team. That East was just not as good as this East, and he didn't have as much competition. And the fact that they may end up with a top 3 or 4 seed, he's like pulled off miracles from time to time.
And you can belabor the sort of minutes usage, which I actually think is a fair thing to discuss as will these guys peter out in the playoffs at all? But it wasn't just he refused to take his best players out of the game. You mentioned he's trying the 3-guard lineup. He's had to figure out some stuff in the front court. We saw it in the Milwaukee game with the way that Precious Achiuwa specifically was used. So you have to, it does feel like anecdotally, and I'm sure there's statistical proof too, I just didn't care to consider it before we came on, he just feels more flexible than he's ever been. And like to see him evolve for a coach that was, I think people would use the word to describe as stubborn or rigid for so long. That's part of this, the Knicks' own evolution too.
Well, so the funny thing about Tibbs is like the moment he realizes something's working, like that he's tries something and it's like, oh, this is working. He just overplays the shit out of it. Oh, Deuce McBride. Oh, you could take threes. All right, you're playing 47 minutes tonight. And that's just like the new standard, Oh, Josh, you can play 40 minutes. You're going to average 42 minutes a game since the All-Star break. And like the minutes thing, I actually argue because they're getting guys back, like Mitch coming back and Anunoby coming back, Boyan being playable is actually like now they're going to have depth. They went through all these weeks of like a 7.5 man rotation where you had to play like Deuce and either Precious or Sims as your backups and then like pick a Piston for the night, and that was like, bro, these Pistons have taken it out of me, man. I was so happy to see two things: that Bogey finally played well last night and it was in a lineup that made sense. And then like, I didn't see Alec Burks. The last 3 months, man, this is why we watch basketball, to not watch Alec Burks.
I'm so curious to see what Tibbs is going to do when you do get to some, I don't know if it's awkward, but you get to some, I think you're going to have to make some lineup decisions in the playoffs where you very clearly have to try and cater to or find a skeleton key for your offense. And then it gets into, well, does this mean that like Bogey's on the court instead of Josh Hart at one point? Because you look at Hartenstein, Brunson, DiVincenzo just has to be on like a part of any best offensive unit. OG Anunoby because of what he unlocks off the ball, but his defense. And then I'm just trying, if you were trying to project what would be the Knicks' most important playoff lineup, the 4 guys I named plus Bojan, I think has a case to be the answer, but are you even willing to get to a point where it's like Josh Hart not being in that lineup feels treasonous?
So it's actually going to depend on Anunoby, because if he's shooting, if his shooting comes back around, it's 2-game sample. First game he was fine. Second game he wasn't. But if he can be a consistent shooter, then Tibbs can feel comfortable leaving Bogey on the court next to Anunoby or a Josh Hart, and you just kind of split those minutes. That like Bogey, like you play Bogey next to Hart or Bogey next to Anunoby, then it's okay. If Hart is not, he's just like been an awful shooter this year, and Anunoby is like basically Josh Hart light from 3, then you kind of almost like have to survive those minutes, I guess is what I'm saying. That, your defense is creating the offense, and then like it's a lot of DiVincenzo threes, whereas with Bogey on the floor, I think I reversed that like Bogey next to one of those 2 guys is going to matter. Because if you put Bogey next to Anunoby and Anunoby shooting 40% from 3, then like it's like you're building such a lead that Josh Hart could come in and get all the rebounds afterwards,
We'll know Tibbs is really on his steez if we see OG Anunoby at the 5. And then so you have Josh Hart.
Don't get crazy. Don't get crazy. Mitch came back and he was like, oh, great. I have my rim protection for 48 minutes. Great. I got between Hartenstein and Mitch,
Yeah, and he would obviously, and we've seen it, he'd go to Jericho Sims before that, even if he wasn't going to.
He went to Precious Achiuwa at the 4 for 2 months. He would absolutely shy away from it.
True. That is true.
Yeah. Look, any complaints or critiques of Tibbs I got, they're all quibbles at this point. Like there's something to be said about dissecting lineups and like shooting being a priority and like boosting the offense. There's also just like a base level of competence and the buy-in that this team now has to his like entire ethos. And I know like it seems like John Macri took over this podcast, but like we've all kind of come to appreciate, like, again, watching these other teams in the East that aren't getting their stuff together and like appreciate, all right, like I'm at least proud watching this team every night, and the team buys into it.
Saying it like Hartenstein talking about how pivotal Tibbs has been, and he's kind of like the Patrick Beverley of head coaches, to where from the outside, and we've even seen this, players say they don't want to play for him, and everyone despises Patrick Beverley. But then you're on Patrick Beverley's team, and I do think there was a point where he just became wildly overrated. But it seems like the people who actually play with him on his team appreciate him. Once you play for Tibbs, it does feel like he's able to imbue them with this belief and gain and curry the favor of his own players, which for all his flaws that he might have on the court with lineups, his views of minutes or even of offense, or the stubbornness with the certain type of rim protection that he wants on the court, to have that connection with your players isn't easy. Hashtag Doc Rivers.
Glad you said it. I was trying to get Macri to call him a bozo last night, and this is another shout out to the Euro step. They stopped calling him Doc. He's Mr. Rivers now. Like, they took away his doctorate. He's no longer Doc. He's just Mr. Rivers. Okay, yeah, right. It's either Mr. Rivers or Glenn.
Good coach, but I do think because all NBA head coaches are good to have to get to that level where there's only 30 jobs. I just feel like he's always been overrated in the sense of this is someone you need to have when you have all these superstars on the roster or these egos to manage. And at every single stop, I guess with the exception of when he left Boston, but it was like with the Clippers, all the different versions of those teams, there was always this weird locker room drama. Look what happened in Philly. And now it's like the Bucks, Damian Lillard posted about narcissism on his Instagram story. Like,
the Doc year where I actually was like, oh, you're a good coach. And it's not like, obviously won a title. So like
Gallo was the Clippers' best player.
Honestly, that season, they were the 8th seed where they traded Tobias Harris. And it's like, oh, they're going to go to the play-in. Or at that time, it wasn't even the play-in. They're just going to go to the lottery. And that team won more games than they lost and became the 8th seed that year. And that was like Pat Bev and Lou Will. And then the next year they traded... They were coming off that year. I was like, oh, like this is Doc's probably most impressive, because that's, I think, when you see what a coach is made of, when you strip away its most talented pieces, and you can't just be like, oh, great players, be awesome. Where you actually have to, like Tibbs, outside of this year, the We Here season where Randall, they were a 4 seed, is probably my most, like Alfred Payton started a ton that season, So like that's, I think, when you get to see what a coach is made of. And Doc, I agree. Like I've seen what you can do when you're forced to like actually make something out of what seems to not be as good as, turn a lottery team into a playoff team. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And then there's just how much he's underachieved when he's had all these Hall of Famers on his teams in playoff situations,
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. So it's like he is a good coach, but it does sort of feel like, not that the plot is lost, but the stuff that in theory he's supposed to be good at, or why he's valued, which is like why the Bucks hired him in the first place, is that actually his greatest strength? Mm-hmm. And I would argue no, but I'm not going to be, when it comes to evaluating coaches, I hate doing that, because Mr. Rivers has forgotten more about basketball in the past 5 seconds than I will personally ever know.
Yes, and that's going to earn you some points with Mr. Macri for sure. Dan Valley, it is always good to talk basketball with you, sir. And I believe this is going to end up being a 2-parter. We recorded enough that we could put one half on Knicks Film School and the other half at HardwoodKnocks. So I believe I'm signing off on your show at the moment. So thank you, HardwoodKnocks, for having me be part of the content plan at the moment. But before you get out of here, any Knicks fans who went over to your channel to find your show, I was gonna say, tell them where they could find your stuff. Dan, just thank you. It's always good to talk to you. We'll sign off that way, and then put bookend separate intros in a better, more cleaner editing way.
Yes, thank you so much. Always.
See how I landed that plane, by the way? That was Denzel in flight.
You didn't think that you were going to close out the Hardwood Knocks episode?
No, I was like, wait, we're an hour and we're almost 90 minutes into this, so that's a tough thing to navigate at the end. But thank you, Dan, as always.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure, always an honor to come on here. And it's always, most of all, just super fun to chat hoops and life with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you have any Knicks Bulls thoughts for Tuesday night? Because this is technically, it says pregame show at the bottom.
I do have a very, the Bulls might have their backcourt of the future. I'm that high on Ayo Dosunmu.
Dosunmu, yeah. He looked great against the Knicks on Friday.
And they've tried different ways ever since before Kobe White returned. They were trying to unlock Ayo more as a scorer. That dude can play. And that was like the fact that they got him on the deal they did when he hit free agency, and that no one was taking a flyer on him. He's like, I won't say he has a higher ceiling than Kobe White, but he's like the most fascinating Chicago Bulls player to me long-term at the moment. I guess that's not saying much on their roster, but Javonte Green's back with the Bulls too. That was a big win for yours truly. I love me some healthy Javonte Green. So shout out to Javonte Green and Ayo Dosunmu. Those are my Bulls takes.
Yeah, both players that destroyed the Knicks on, like, DeRozan had 7 points going into the fourth quarter. Both of the Javonte Green and Dosunmu like destroyed the Knicks on Friday night. So the Knicks are obviously looking for payback. Dan, as always, it's good talking to you.